Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation. April is Child Abuse Prevention Month. Although this is a difficult subject to discuss, it is an important one. Please listen with an open mind and be mindful of any emotional triggers you may have in listening to this episode. As many of you know, I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse and only began sharing my story a few years ago. I had the privilege of touring a local child advocacy center in Orlando called Kids House and spoke with the CEO Juliette Kong. Kids House is dedicated to preventing child abuse and helping child abuse victims and families by providing coordinated services in a safe, child-friendly environment from report and investigation through treatment and resolution. Juliette has been working with Kids House for 20 years. Her passion for preventing child abuse and working with the victims and their families is unwavering. I was completely in awe, speechless, and in all honesty, in tears after experiencing the Walk in Your Shoes tour. This is difficult, but I challenge you to take a moment to think about any child in your life that you care about and how you would feel if you found out they were being physically, sexually, or emotionally abused every day. There are many ways to support child abuse prevention. I encourage you to find a local center and visit to learn more about the reality of child abuse. If you are in the Orlando Sanford area, Kids House is an incredible facility with the most caring staff I have ever encountered. I highly recommend you visit. Please check out their website where you can make a donation, volunteer, and gather resources to help prevent child abuse. Again, please be mindful of any emotional triggers that you may experience from hearing about child abuse in this episode. But I implore you to listen on to this very important and impacting conversation with Juliette. I'm loving these conversations and hope you are too. If you are, please rate my podcast on your platform of choice and share it with others. If you would like to support the show with a donation to help keep this podcast going, you can become a patron of the show by visiting my website or patreon.com/sifumimichan. For comments or suggestions, email me at sifumimichan@gmail.com or reach out on social media at sifumimichan. Now, on with the show. Juliette, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast today and for inviting me to come out to Kids House.
Thank you for coming. We're always so glad to share stuff about Kids House and what we do, especially during Child Abuse Prevention Month.
Yeah, and so can you just tell me a little bit about what's your elevator pitch to people who don't know anything about what Kids House is, and just kind of share what it is that you do here and what you offer.
Kids House is a children's advocacy center in Seminole County, and what we do is we provide hope to children that have been victims of abuse. So we provide services including medical exams, forensic interviews, child advocacy, and also mental health services to victims of abuse from 0 to 18. Our children that come through here have been victims of physical, sexual abuse, neglect, and medical neglect.
Yeah, and I think that this makes for people very uncomfortable to talk about, and they don't realize how common it is. You and I are speaking in April right now, and it is, Child Abuse Prevention Month. How common is child abuse?
Child abuse is actually a lot more common than people think. When it comes to physical abuse, if you don't know, one of the top deaths of children under the age of 4 is by physical abuse. So many children in our community are victims of abuse. We serve over 1,000 children per year. So that within itself can tell you. We also just within Seminole County, within the child abuse hotline, the child abuse hotline receives between 3,000 to 4,000 calls per year regarding abuse allegations.
Wow. I just had the unique and, I don't want to say the word traumatic, but it was the traumatic experience of getting the tour, which you call the Walk in Their Shoes tour. And of course, as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, it was on many levels extraordinarily impacting. But I think for anybody to do this tour, you would really get to see and experience and feel the gravity of what this is like. And so this tour that you have set up is absolutely phenomenal. And you can say all these statistics, and it is baffling and absolutely horrifying, but I think doing this tour really kind of puts that in light and shows you right in your face, like, hey, no, this is what the reality is. Can you tell me a little bit about the tour itself? Like, was this something that the kids' house, is that very specific to here? Is it something you decided that would be a really good way to kind of bring awareness and also for potential people to see if like this is kind of good for their family member? Like, can you tell me a little bit about the tour itself?
Well, we call it the Walk in Your Shoes tour because it involves a child that actually, their story and what they experienced when they actually came through Kids House. This is an actual story. So we've changed the names and we've changed a few things, but it's an actual child that has came through Kids House. And the story brings you into a child's life that has been brought with allegations of sexual abuse. And it walks you through exactly all of the services that she was provided while she was here. And you get to know that child's inner story, but then also know what services we provided to that child. It is meant to be emotional. It is something that Kids House has developed throughout the years. So we've been doing the Walk in Your Shoes tours for a while. It is something that we take pride in because working at Kids House is more than just work. There's a passion behind it. There's a passion that each one of our team members has, and one of those things and ways that the buy-in for not only community members but our team is to go through your Walk in Your Shoes tour. So that you can actually experience what a child actually does go through when they're here at Kids House.
Yeah, it was so impacting. And, for those listening, if you're in Central Florida, in Orlando, like I highly recommend, you take that experience. And so not only just to build empathy, but just education. Like it was such an educational experience to think that it's such an educational experience to kind of go through that and also see the different steps of support and advocacy, and from the medical exams to the therapy. I got to meet the rock star of the facility, which is Jordan, the dog, the therapy dog, and that was very special because, in all honesty, I just shared with you earlier off air that I needed that therapy dog at the end of this thing, so it was a perfect way to end the tour because it was so emotional for me. And audience members who are listening, that I have shared a lot about my story and my experiences, and this was absolutely, every person that I met here was able to kind of bring me to such a calm and to really like connect with you on a level where, all they were taking me through the story and the tour. But I mean, for me, I just felt like I got a really great therapy session and I was able to I just felt so supported. And so what you do here with your staff, while I've met therapists, I've met a lot of advocates and counselors, I think there's something very special and unique to Kids House where, it's not just the logistics of, you meet A, B, C, D person, but maybe you could tell me a little about your selection for why and who comes on board with you, because like you said, there's beyond a passion, and there's something very fluid and connective between going from one room to the other and meeting each person, yet there's a familiarity. Like you just feel like you're just kind of in one place, which is, I guess, the point.
Yeah, it is. As a children's advocacy center, that's one of the main things that we do is providing services under one roof. Mm-hmm. But it's a team of people who do all of those services. One of the things that we all can agree on as a Kids House team member is that when that child walks in through that door, nothing else matters. So when we hire, that's what we want to see. We want to see that that our culture, that you already have it instilled in you, that when that child comes in, everything else doesn't matter because that child is the main focus right there. And that's how it is, for how you felt going in. That's how a child should always feel when they're coming to something. They're talking about something most private and they may have never spoken about it out loud. But we have to set that tone so that when they do come here, that they are able to open up and talk about the most private things that they've never talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. And that definitely resonates. And so talk to me about your passion, because you're obviously very passionate and you've been here for how many years?
20 years.
20 years. How has that role evolved for you over time? Because I'd love listeners to understand, like, one, why you're so passionate, but yeah, tell me about your time here at Kids House.
It's been really interesting because when I was in my undergrad, I wanted to work with children from the get-go. So I wanted to be a guardian ad litem. And if you don't know, guardian ad litems don't get paid. They're volunteers. So once I saw that they were volunteers and they don't get paid, I had to figure out what I wanted to do with children. And so that's where Kids House actually came about. Kids House was my first real job out of undergrad. And I was actually hired first to implement their case tracking system that would track all of the cases. So that's why I was hired. Originally, that was the position that would get me in the door. Well, within a week, the executive director at the time realized I had case management experience, and she promoted me. She promoted me, but she still kept me as case tracking too. So I've had multiple jobs throughout Kids House throughout my 20 years. And my passion, really the resonation for me when it comes to Kids House and why I've been here for so long, really comes from the fact is how many places are you able to go to where you see a child so broken that, I mean, I've seen a 5-year-old, even less than 5, have suicidal ideations, won't even talk, won't even say anything to you. But then weeks after they've come to Kids House and meet with our therapists, the drastic change. You don't have very many places that you actually see the brokenness turn into hope and actual physical change. That's what Kids House does. So my passion is the fact is that that's exactly what we do every day. So that fuels me for sure, as you can see and hear, because I know how much each child, any child who has been broken and gone through so much trauma, they deserve to have the services that we provide and the way we provide it. They deserve that. So when it comes to our team, when you sit there and you think about it, is we expect nothing less that you do have that type of passion. Because once as you did, once you go through the tour, or even if you just walk into Kids House, you feel it. It changes you because you see the change in what these services do for these children and how important and valued it is.
Absolutely. And what have you found to be the most difficult part, though? Because I know that it's an inspiring job because you clearly are getting that what you just explained, that gratification of seeing, but what's the most challenging part for you, I guess? Is it actually hearing the stories? Is it, there's so much involved. What have you found that's been challenging, and how do you cope with that?
That's been a growth. That's been an actual growth. I think that anyone that comes into child welfare, period, it's not just Kids House, in child welfare, it's going to expose you to emotions that you never thought that you would ever experience, because of the fact is that you also don't realize until you read these stories and you really hear these stories, how inhumane people can be to these children. So yes, I will tell you from my standpoint, I feel if the stories don't affect me, then I shouldn't be here. So I don't feel in which that you should be desensitized to it, because then you shouldn't be here. It's when it does affect you, is what will motivate you to continue to do the work you're doing. So that's where I'm at. It's like, I will tell you, all of those stories affect me. And the fuel and passion that you see, you have me sit around a table in which that I have to talk about a child's death and how passionate I get. And how I will advocate, how my whole entire team will step up and advocate for that child, to making sure that child, even though that child has passed away, is still heard.
Yeah. And I'm so in awe of the fact that you've been doing this for 20 years, and that it's not surprising, because I know you, that you're still passionate, but that it hasn't, broken you down, and then just because it's a lot to deal with, and that just speaks to your strength and your personality, and it's just really commendable. So thank you. First of all, thank you. Thank you, because the work you're doing absolutely makes a difference. I've only been here an hour, and I get that. It was just like a glimpse into barely, scratching the surface, because it's so much more than just the tour and seeing the rooms and hearing the story. I know that it can be grueling, and it's not work that you can just go, 5 o'clock's done, I'm going to go home now. How do you not think about it? How do you not get emotionally attached? So, but I'm sure the families are grateful, and I know that I heard the stories that there's like a graduation at the end when the kids go on their way. But, for those that are not directly involved, I think that you need to hear that people really appreciate what you're doing, because it's something they don't want to see, they don't want to hear, they don't want to think about, it's uncomfortable. And I always believe that these are the conversations that need to be shared and had, because that's how we grow and learn. But thank you on behalf of all those that haven't told you that, or that aren't in it, right? But you are appreciated, and the work you're doing is very commendable.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that, and I know that my team appreciates that too, of that, just the work is not easy. I want you to, just as a side note, to know is that it's realistic that it hurts us all. It affects our team, my team members, certain cases that come through here, and we don't even call them really cases, it's these children affect us. But that's where we also have a precedent that then we talk about it. You will see each of our team members talking to each other as supports, because there are times in which it is not easy. Same for me. It is not easy, because some of these cases come back to back, and it is hard. You think you've heard it all, and then you get surprised. Mm-hmm. And but our team absolutely takes care of themselves too, in which that's where we always do check-ins. And we also making sure that that we have this open communication of just being able to talk through those clients that come in through here.
Yeah, and Patrick shared with me, and who took me on my tour, that I think it was just in a month you've had 54 cases. Mm-hmm. And that's shocking, because that's just your cases, right? So that doesn't mean that's what's going on elsewhere, like where child services steps in or law enforcement has had to deal with. I can't even imagine what you shared beginning with the statistics, but just kind of seeing that come through here. And just from a general standpoint, so how do people find you, or how do you get connected with the kids that do come through here?
Well, the first thing is that normally the process is that to come through Kids House is abuse report gets called into the hotline. So into the abuse hotline is a report is then called in, and once the report is called in, it's then diverted to where the county that the child resides in, and so it would come to Seminole County Sheriff's Office, which is the Sheriff's Office holds a contract for Child Protective Services in Seminole County, and then from there, depending on going to law enforcement and Child Protective Services are the ones who mainly contact us. We provide a direct service to them. So it is a part of their investigation, is why kids come through Kids House. We are in this a statute, in the Florida statute in Chapter 39 under the Children's Advocacy Center, and we're also under Chapter 39 in which that certain children or certain cases have to come through Kids House. So any child that has injuries from the neck up that is under the age of 5 has to come to Kids House. There are, for sexual abuse cases, if there's STDs or anything like that under the age of 12, that is a requirement for Kids House. So there are certain types of cases that are mandatory in the state of Florida that have to come through our facility.
I see. And can you tell me a little bit about what Child Abuse Prevention Month represents? Because obviously that's very connected to what the work you do here. And each month there's so many awareness months and things like that. But what does that mean for you, the work you do, and the community you serve?
Child Abuse Prevention Month is really big. One, it is getting out to the community that child abuse is real, that it is happening in your community, it is happening in your neighborhood. To say it's not is something that you're definitely have your head in the sand, because it is happening. And especially right now with the pandemic, it's even raised higher. So for me, when you think, I'm not sure if Patrick showed you about Faith's Garden. So Faith's Garden is out front of Kids House. Mm-hmm. And Faith's Garden was named after a child that was 4 years old who passed away from physical abuse. And if you go into Faith's Garden, it's a place of reflection. And on there is stones, paver stones, and each of the paver stones represents a child who has passed away in Seminole County due to abuse. That is what we want to prevent. That is why Child Abuse Prevention Month is so important too, is because that awareness is that it's real. Children are dying from child abuse. Yeah. And with the pandemic, what we've seen is that there's been an increase in our physical abuse cases and the intensity of the physical abuse cases. So prevention is so important. It is about saying your child crying is okay. Mm-hmm. Children don't die from crying, but you picking up your child when you're so angry could.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about how the pandemic has affected? I know you just said there's been an increase, and I'm sure from a psychological standpoint, people will be like, well, they're angrier, they're stuck in their homes. But I've also heard, cases where, because I'm fortunate to work with kids as well, where, parents are like, well, we've had to remove from the other parent that's been abusive, but then because of COVID, the court was shut down, and it's just been, I've been hearing horror stories in how it's negatively impacted kids and their safety. Maybe you could speak a little bit to that, and if there's anything you can share.
Yes, what has happened, as of last year in 2020, when the pandemic first started, when we had the shutdown, that affected a lot of things. Because children are not visible in the community, of course, so then you don't have the mandated reporters, which are your teachers, your counselors, your coaches. They're mandated reporters. So those kids weren't being visible. So we saw a decrease in our reports. But what we did see an increase is emergency visits. And the emergency visits to the hospitals, because these kids' injuries are so intense and they're requiring actual hospitalization, is what we actually saw last year. That's really hard to swallow, because then when you're talking about the stressors, we can't minimize any of that. Because families are struggling. They're struggling financially. They're struggling to figure out how they're going to, where they're going to live, about their jobs. They're also, some of them were caring for their children 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So the amount, the intensity, we can't, and the stressors, we can't minimize that of how it was and continuing to affect our children. We also have, you have to also remember is that what people forget is that children pick up on that. They pick up on your stress. They feed off of it. And how do children react when they're stressed? They don't have the best behavior, right? So it's a domino effect if you think about it. You've got a stressed out parent and you've got a child who doesn't understand everything that's going on and it's not expected to, but doesn't know how to deal with the feelings that they're feeling and reacting abnormally than their normal behavior. That's absolutely instrumental in what creates child abuse.
Yeah, and I feel and hope, with the vaccine and that we're all turning a corner and that we can have that awareness. There's a difference between being overly paranoid and seeing a kid and go, maybe that kid might be being abused. But what can mandated reporters do to also help be aware? Because I know it becomes a feeling of guilt when you go, wow, I didn't know this was happening. And are there things that us as normal citizens can look for in the community to kind of help? And when should we speak out? When should we not? When are we overstepping our boundaries? It's such a difficult thing to gauge.
Well, I will tell you, as long as you're not a mandated reporter, I want you to know it's not your job to investigate. It's our job. So your job is, if you suspect it, you call the 1-800-96-ABUSE hotline number. That's what you do. It is not your job to investigate. You are calling in because you suspect child abuse. Hey, you're not saying that it's happening. There are others that are involved who are investigating, is it happening? So suspecting child abuse, I would say, here's the thing, is there normal signs? If you talk about the waitress a couple months ago who saw the little boy in the restaurant and she called 911. There's sometimes some certain obvious signs of bruising. Kids normally get bruises on what we call their normal points of their elbows, their shins. But if you see slap marks, or if you see grab marks, that's a whole different story. You also have that you don't know when, because sometimes children, and majority of children and adults do this, is that when something traumatized happens, they go internal and their demeanor completely changes. That alone doesn't mean that they've been sexually abused or physically abused. But again, that's not your job to investigate. That's ours. If you feel something has happened and you can connect some form of dots, all we need is a child's name. That's all we need. And we'll figure it out from there. That's what the abuse hotline does, is that you provide that child's first and last name, if possible. If you can provide the last name, they will find that child. And then we'll investigate it. And we'll determine if it is, but it's not yours to decide. If you suspect it, it's how much is it in which that we would rather you call it in for us to investigate than to know that you didn't because you weren't sure if you should or shouldn't. Mm-hmm. We want you to, because then it could save a child's life. Yeah, and I'm sure you see here, oh, I guess I should have called, or now I feel bad. And of course, none of us are trained to know and see, and we take it upon ourselves. Well, we don't want to get the parent in trouble if we're not sure, and this could open but you're right. The alternative being, having another unfortunate name in the garden, having another case come through here. I'm sure that you would love it if you had to close down Kid's House because there was never any abuse ever again. That would be like an ideal world that's impossible, but it's a goal though. It's a goal. That's what we talk about. It's like we would love a world without a child abuse that take us out of the job. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. take us out of the job. I mean, I've been here for 20 years, but if all of a sudden there was no child abuse, I'm okay not having a job. I really am.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, we can't say that now.
Yeah.
And even more today that we can't say that now because going back to the pandemic has caused even more stressors, and we're even more concerned about our kids more than ever. They're having their own internal stress too. So we're, even though that our numbers, our numbers are not high to which that we've seen in the previous years, but we also know it's coming.
Yeah.
That's what, and it's sincere, is that we do know it's coming, because as children are back in schools, back in the daycares, that's why when Patrick tells you about the 54, that's what we're starting to see. Mm-hmm. We're starting to see the increase.
Yeah, and literally, like, children who are being abused are being locked in their home with their abusers. Because typically, and you can correct me, is it normally someone they know, a parent, someone close to them? It's usually, the abuse is usually by someone known.
Correct. Yes. For unknown alleged perpetrators, it's less than 2%. It's almost about 1%. So you're exactly right. I mean, it is, normally they're in a caretaker role. They're watching the child, like, that's exactly how it is. You can, for us, we always can't say this is the cause of child abuse. There's multiple things, multiple layers, because you're involving humans. So with our multiple layers, there's multiple different things that lead to child abuse. And there's not, for us, we can't sit there and say that one thing causes child abuse. Mm-hmm. We can't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and would you say that amongst the kids that you've, the people that have come through, is it normally where the kids don't even realize what's happening versus the ones that have tried to speak out and are not believed? Like, I know that those are kind of your two, I know there's more nuance, but there's two scenarios where, kids are not believed. They're maybe told someone, hey, so-and-so hit me or touched me or whatever. And I know that kids are often not believed. And then you also have the kids that just, they didn't really know that this was wrong or that things were happening to them. And so is there one of more or the other, or is it just a mixed batch?
There's more, I will tell you, with the Me Too movement and more awareness that is out. There has been more of your, I didn't know that this was wrong. Our majority of our sexual abuse is children over the age of 10. And a lot of times it's been going on for a lot longer. So it is awareness when it comes to that. They didn't know. This stuff isn't talked about in schools. Seminole County Public Schools is involved in Kids House. But that's not something parents want their kids to actually have that somebody else talk about those things. That's not. So sometimes it's not until they're a lot older being older than 10, that they're told through passing or something that, wait a minute, I saw this on TV, so wait, that's not normal? That's not normal that dad beats me on a consistent basis when he drinks? Some of them don't. That's their home, and that's all they've known.
Yeah. And you bring up a really, really important point, and that was one of the main reasons that, that light bulb went off. One is the ignition of the Me Too movement and that awareness. And in me wanting to share my story was,
educate your children. It's such a taboo. I'm Asian American, and so you don't talk about stuff, you don't talk about this, you don't talk about that, and therapy is for weak people, all of these things, right? And so I feel like there is such a disconnect between the education of one as a parent, and it's hard. You and I talked earlier, like I'm full admit that that's too hard of a job for me, and I can't take that on, so tip my hat. But if you are a parent, it is your job to educate your children and to teach them body awareness and to be scientific and medical about it. Like, we have to break that stigma. And then the second part of that is the whole school thing, right? And then you have lots of protests about what they should and shouldn't learn, and then these opinions. But do you believe that would prevent more of these cases if there was better education?
Better education, not saying that it has to be in schools, but better education, absolutely, yes. I mean, that's where it comes back to where prevention and awareness. Prevention is different than awareness. And the awareness piece of that this is happening, and this is what you do if something is happening, should be done. And it should be done, not just parents. I have to say, I really do feel as a parent myself, it's important. It is my responsibility, and solely, yes, my responsibility, but I have a community. I have a community support. I have family support. And sometimes it's just even having those conversations with your family support or your support systems to figuring out how to best speak to your child. Because I can do that all day. Like, trust me, 20 years of experience, my child's not going to have a problem, but my child's never going to have a sleepover. But, it is different. It's absolutely different for other people. But that's where you have to find your resources, because there are resources. There are actual books that talk through those on that child's level. So even reading a book, and you make a good point when it comes to knowing your body parts. It's a real interesting factor, because I grew up too not knowing the technical names of my private parts, right? But it is important, because saying Grandpa touch my purse is not comparable to Grandpa touch my vagina.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, and I think this is something that, with the awareness and with things like Child Prevention Month, Child Abuse Prevention Month, and all of that, it's just something we have to keep hearing as a society. It is okay to have these discussions, and like you said, there are resources to help you do it from every facet, not just the body awareness, but even how to talk to your child about death, how to talk to your child. I mean, those things are hard. As a parent, of course, you're not going to just know just because you are a parent. There's education for parents as well, and support. So I love that you brought that up. I did want to talk a little bit about that issue of kids not being believed, though, or the fear they're not going to be believed, because I think that's one of the reasons they also don't speak out, right? Is that something that you see a lot? And then how can we turn our ears and our eyes on to, believing children, and what more can we be doing, in that regard?
It's not that I don't have a hard time with it. I guess with the believe, it doesn't come up very often for us, because we believe every child that comes in here.
Right.
That's not second. That's our norm. Is that every child in here is believed, regardless, even if there are some things that might not be believable per se, or could not have happened because of time, whatever. There's still concerns there. There's still concerns for that child. So we believe that regardless, this child needs services. Let's provide that child with services. Let's make sure that the services that they're being provided are the right services for them. So when you say believe, that's hard for me, because every child that comes through here is believed.
Right. But you're trained, and you're also, this is your passion and your job. And I think I refer to just having parents tell me that, or having friends tell me, oh, so-and-so, the daughter was trying to tell the dad about the mom and vice versa. And I'm like, how does that even happen? But I think it's just like you said, us constantly bringing awareness, educating ourselves. There's more that we can do, but what are other ways people can help so we don't feel so powerless, we don't feel so uncomfortable with this, that we can talk about it, we can feel a little bit more knowledgeable? Like what are ways that we can help prevent this?
Well, first of all, like just so that you know, is that on Kids House's website, kidshouse.org, there are parenting tips. There are prevention tips that we absolutely line out as a resource. You also want to know that as a Children's Advocacy Center, that is something. So if you feel that you need some education or some additional resources, we can provide that to you. We can direct you to different resources. We have 3 therapists that are on staff, and the amount of books, education books that we have on variety of different things, we can be able to refer you to some of those resources. So I also think the thing is, when it comes to awareness and prevention of child abuse, with everything, knowledge is power. And so, and I know that's, poetic or whatever, but it's real. You have to do your part too. And you have to do your part, as like you have, Mimi, of coming here, of learning more about Kids House and about what we do, but also learning this is real. This is real, in which that it's going on in your backyard, and not minimizing that. And you using the podcast, that brings awareness. Starting that discussion is the foundation to making it more normalized, per se, to having those types of conversations that may be uncomfortable. When I say about calling in a report of child abuse, if you suspect child abuse, I really mean it. I'm not just saying it. Is that if you suspect something, it's not your job to investigate it. You're not expected to. We want you to just call it in. That within itself, taking that stigma. And I didn't emphasize this, but as long as you're not a mandated reporter, you don't have to tell them who called it in. You can do it anonymously. That within itself can just be left that you called it in anonymously, but it's being investigated.
Yeah.
That's important. That's where we have to get to. You talk about prevention. Prevention means is that if something's happening, that people are now calling it in, versus what you're saying is, I knew it was going on, but I didn't want to get involved, or I suspected something, but I didn't want her to get mad at me for saying anything. No, you don't have an out, because you can call in an abuse report anonymously. Mm-hmm. And no one's going to contact you back. And I will tell you, under Chapter 39, it states that even if you call in a report, as a reporter, investigations cannot tell anyone who actually called in the report. Okay. It is not public information.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that takes, I think, the pressure off and encourages people, absolutely, to keep your eyes and ears open and be part of the solution and not a bystander. It's interesting, this totally ties in, because of course there's a lot of dissonance, a lot of civil unrest. I'm doing seminars on bystander intervention training and harassment training for, all the anti-Asian hate. And so, you being a bystander and not speaking out or being an advocate or doing something, you're still part of the problem.
Correct.
Just because you didn't bully a kid doesn't mean that you're not the bully if you saw it happen and you didn't speak out or advocate. I'm not saying for people to, jump in and fight someone or anything, but you have to be part. If you see something, then you don't report it, then, you should carry that guilt, actually, right? But I mean, if you, like you said, but if you just suspect, you're not sure, it's much better to just go ahead and report it, because that's not your job at that point. You just dropped drop it into the professional's hands and then they take it over. So that's really valuable information that you shared.
And sometimes I will just give you an example is I saw something in a grocery store of a mother and her child, and the incident, first it was a one-time incident when I first saw it, but then it started to escalate even more. Yes, my training was normally of like, oh, heck no. Like, this is not happening in front of me, right? In order to not escalate mom, what I did was try to engage the child. So to calm mom down. Then I went to the front and I reported it. Like, you know, yes. Like, but that's what for me trained wise is that I knew that if I needed to intervene, but if I intervene and saying, don't do that, mom.
Right, yes.
Mom's not gonna just hit the child, she's gonna hit me too. But if you try to figure out a way to de-escalate it, and then afterwards it gave me time to just go ahead and call in a report. But that is our job, is that if we say, and I wholeheartedly believe this, if we say that we live in a community, isn't that a community's job to protect one another? And if it is our job to protect one another, as you stated, why aren't we stepping in? Why are we just being the bystanders?
Absolutely. I know you have to get on with your day. You have a lot of important work to do. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about all of these issues, bringing awareness and educating me personally. So thank you for that. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners? I will list, of course, Kids House and all the links that you're sharing with me, but is there anything else you'd like to share?
No, I just want to say, just remember the hotline is 1-800-96-ABUSE. That's the most important number.
Absolutely. There you have it, everyone. Please call it in. And thank you so much, Juliette.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Mimi.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.